If you're preparing for 2027, then this is a demo for history subject. In history, we have different parts. We have ancient, medieval, modern, and world history. In fact, we also have a part which is known as art and culture. This topic is very, very important for civil services. In civil services, first let me give you a brief idea. Hi everyone, I'm Vikas Elabat, and now we are starting our Pinnacle Batch. So if you're preparing for 2027, then this is a demo for history subject. In history, we have different parts. We have ancient, medieval, modern, and world history. In fact, we also have a part which is known as art and culture. In today's lecture, I'm going to focusing on one of the initial topic of modern history. This is just like a demo lecture which is going to give you the idea how I am going to teach in this batch and how you can get the maximum out of this in order to get a very good rank in civil services. This topic is very, very important for civil services. In civil services, first let me give you a brief idea what kind of questions are being asked. So UPSC is asking questions from modern India in both prelims as well as mains. In prelims, roughly from last few years, 4 to 5 questions are going to come from modern India. Okay, I will tell you the meaning of the word modern, then I'll tell you the meaning of the overall chronology also. Second, if we talk about mains, in mains around 3 questions are coming from modern India, which roughly corresponds to 40 to 45 marks, broadly around this. Alright, so that makes it very important to read modern history. Modern history is also going to give you a very good idea about the current present developments that we have in India also, right? Because the background is very, very relevant. Now let us try to understand that if you want to master history, then you have to understand the process. Okay, there are few words which we always use: ancient, medieval, and modern. Today, let us just focus on this last word, modern. What is the meaning of the word modern? The word modern specifically means the development of the new ideas in the field of polity, economy, society, and religion. Polity, I mean like the beginning of the rule of law, the beginning of constitutionalism, the beginning of separation of power. All these important ideas, when they started being effectively implemented, that is what we say the modern political system. Similarly, when the society was based upon the ideas of equality, it was based upon the ideas where everybody was allowed to have freedom of speech and expression. That is again the beginning of the modern economy, the beginning of capitalism. The beginning of the industrial revolution is often linked with the modern era. If we talk about religion, then the idea of secularism, where there should be a distance between the state and the religion, is linked with the modern idea of a religious, which is mostly going to be private in nature rather than having a public dominance. When all these ideas were becoming popular, this age came to be known as modern. Okay, when we talk about modern, Europe modernized a little bit earlier than us, and I'll tell you the process for that. Okay, and later on, these ideas also became prominent in India also. But when we talk about how India became modern, the whole story again it gets linked to the beginning of the arrival of Europeans. So when Europeans came to India, they started coming out with these modern ideas. These modern ideas were in the field of polity, they were in the field of society, they were in the field of economy, and they were also in the field of religion. Whenever somebody asks you what is the meaning of modern, so modern is nothing but it's a set of ideas which are now regulating our polity, economy, society, and religion. So this society that we have right now, it is based upon modern ideas. The beginning of the word modern, okay, we often link it to these European companies. Today we will discuss in detail about these European companies. Then we'll understand what kind of impact they had on India. All of you know that the first one to arrive, it was Portuguese. And then the most important for us, that is British. Right? In between we have others, so we will discuss in detail about that. But what matters the most, the first one to arrive and the one which colonized us, right? British, yes, it helped in the modernization of India, but at the same time, they were also responsible for our exploitation. And in fact, their main agenda was exploitation, and what we got the benefit, okay, even from that exploitation, was modernization. And our current political system, our current economic system, even the level at which the society is currently working on, all of this is having linkages with British. All right, let us start with this topic. This topic is very, very important, and in fact, it is very interesting also, the arrival of the Europeans. So let us now try to understand it. All right. So first of all, this Pinnacle batch is going to focus a lot on the fundamentals. Okay. So if you're preparing for 2027, this is going to be the right time. This is going to be the right time to begin with this, and I leave everything else to you. All right. So please focus on all of that. 1 second. Yes. So when we talk about European companies, in general, we discuss four. Okay. The first one to arrive are Portuguese. The second one to arrive, they were Dutch. Third were British. And in general, we skip all the way to the French. But if we see overall timeline, there is one more company which comes in between, and that is the Danish company. The first one, Portuguese. You know that the first person who came to India, he was Vasco da Gama. So Vasco da Gama was the first person who was able to reach India from South Africa, okay, from the region of the African continent, and that's how the direct trade route, okay, please remember the word direct trade route, was established from Europe all the way to India. But there were certain factors which were responsible for that. Why they came to India? The trade between India and Europe was going on since ancient times. So what changed effectively which brought them towards India? So we will have a discussion on that. Okay. First, please understand the timeline. So the first one to come, it was Portuguese. So Portuguese were the first one. They arrived in the 15th century itself. And once they arrived, they wanted to have a monopoly over the trade. The trade was very, very profitable. In fact, when Vasco da Gama came to India, okay, in his trip, he got 60 times profit. Try to understand, 60 times profit. And that's why they realized that India is the real deal. Indian products were in great demand in Europe. And that's why the profit was going to be humongous. And this is also going to create a specific thing in India which is known as commercial revolution, because trade and commerce is going to rise in a very remarkable manner in the coming centuries. The first one was Portuguese. The second to arrive, it was Dutch. Okay, and the Dutch, they arrived in the 17th century. So there was roughly a gap of around 100 years between the Portuguese and the Dutch. The Dutch were able to replace Portuguese to certain extent in different parts of the world. Like if we take the example of Indonesia. So from Indonesia, the Dutch were able to defeat Portuguese. Dutch also defeated Portuguese in Indian water. But just after Dutch, we see the entry of British. The British were not that much far behind, right? Initially, there was a gap of 100 years between the first and the second company. But the gap between the second and the third company was hardly few years. The British, they were having the strongest navy. And in the course of time, they will play a major role, right, in creating the trade linkages between India and Europe. And over a period of time, they'll be responsible for the colonization of India. But not before they have a fight with the French, which is popularly known as Carnatic Wars. 3 Carnatic Wars were fought, and finally in 1763, with the signing of Treaty of Paris, there was only one power which was going to take the initiative for controlling the Indian subcontinent, and that is going to be British. After the British, we also see the entry of Danish company. Danish company was not that much strong, neither they were too much interested in the trade and commerce. Their only area where they were functioning, that was that of the religious conversion. They wanted to promote Christianity, and that's what they believed in. After Danish, we see the entry of French. The French, they were a strong power. In fact, if we talk about continental Europe, okay, continental Europe means all the countries except Britain. So this in continental Europe, France was probably the most powerful power, and France did play a major role in the initial battles, okay, which were there in the 18th century, right? So in general, what we can summarize, we see the entry of how many companies? We saw the entry of 5 companies in India. The first one to arrive was Portugal, okay. The last one to arrive, it was French, right? During the initial centuries, meaning 17th century, these companies, they kept on focusing, in fact 16th also, if we incorporate Portuguese, 16th century and 17th century, they largely focused on trade. Why? What's the reason for that? Why they largely focused on trade? Because the powerful rulers in India were Mughals, and Mughals were the real sovereign. In fact, Portuguese arrived before Mughals. They came in 1498. Mughal Empire was founded by Babur in 1526, and it was consolidated by Akbar. And after 1556, Mughal Empire became stable under the leadership of Akbar, and then eventually it's kept on expanding. So that's why till the time Mughal Empire was strong, in general, all these companies, Portuguese, Dutch, English, and even French, we are not counting the Danish because they were largely focused on religious activities. So all these companies largely focused on trade. But the moment Mughal Empire started declining, after death of Aurangzeb in 18th century, 1707, that gave them the opportunity to participate in India's internal affairs, and the seminal event which is linked to that, that is the 3 Carnatic Wars. And out of these 3 Carnatic Wars, English is going to come on top and they will defeat the French. So this is the broad summary of what we have discussed so far. Now let us take each and every topic in detail. And once we are going to take this in detail, you will have a very good understanding. I hope the timeline is clear. Okay, number 1. Number 2, you are able to understand which power is going to interplay, right, for the Empire of India between British and French. Let us now continue. Okay, let us now continue. So, please try to understand that the Portuguese came in the 15th century. What is 15th century famous for? 15th century in the history of Europe, is known for a phenomena which is known as Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. And what kind of rebirth was it? It was the rebirth of the culture of Greeks and Romans. So we see updation of knowledge in the field of polity, economy, society, religion, all these fields because of this phase of Renaissance. In the Europe, Renaissance is famous for discovery of man and discovery of world. Why discovery of man? Because man now got acquainted with the knowledge of multiple subjects and based upon the ideas which were given in the culture of Greeks as well as Romans. And second, it was discovery of the world, because now the sovereigns of Europe were trying to create a map of the world. They wanted to acquaint themselves with the knowledge of geography. That's why large number of travelers, they were trying to go in different direction. They want to discover the world. And this is how India was also discovered by Vasco da Gama. He was the one who was able to find the direct route. But he was not the only one. Okay, in your schools you must have learned about Christopher Columbus. Okay, so there were multiple such travelers who were trying to do that. Like Columbus, he wanted to come to India, but Columbus eventually went towards the America. Even before Vasco da Gama, there was one person by the name of Bartholomew Diaz. By the name of Bartholomew Diaz. He came to the Cape of Good Hope. I hope all of you know about Cape Town, which is in South Africa. So previously it was known as Cape of Good Hope. So Bartholomew Diaz in 1487 came to the Cape of Good Hope. He wanted to come towards India, but he couldn't come, and eventually he went back. This pathway of Bartholomew Diaz was learned by Vasco da Gama, and in 1498 he was able to come to India. One thing which was essentially responsible why they came to India, this was Renaissance, known as rebirth of the Greek and the Roman culture, and under this there was updation of knowledge of every subject, and at the same time they were trying to discover the geography of the world. In fact, for the first time the map of the world was created. Previously there used to be lots of unnecessary knowledge, right, that the world is flat, but now they realize the world is round, and you can navigate the whole globe, you can circumnavigate the whole world, and that's the knowledge which the Europeans were able to get during this phase of Renaissance. In fact, this is going to create the kind of curiosity among the Europeans why they will develop the best of the navies, because they realize that if you want to conquer the world, what do you require? You require navy. That was the best form of means of transport if you want to go long distance in those times. So please try to remember one thing which was responsible for coming of Europeans to India, that was Renaissance. Now let us try to create a framework. Okay, all of us, we love stories, but stories do not work in UPSC. Suppose if I ask you a basic question, why did Europeans came to India? So answer writing is very important. So whenever we try to learn, we focus on political factors, we focus on social factors, we focus on economic factors, we focus on religious factors, we try to also integrate the technological factors. Right. So history, whenever we read history subject is nothing. It's a summation of multiple other subjects. So we try to arrange the ideas. So if somebody asks you what are the factors responsible for the arrival of Europeans to India, your answer should not be any 1 or 2 point. You should try to create a framework. We are here to become toppers, right? I was able to get 324 marks in history optional, the highest in India in 2018, and so far it has been the highest. Many of my students have been able to get the best marks in history optional. How? By following these kinds of framework. So from the beginning, even in the demo class, I would like all of you to understand this, that if you want to learn answer writing, you have to approach like this. Stories are good, stories are very good for interest, but at the same time, we have to focus like this. So suppose if we are discussing our first topic, so rather than just telling you about the stories, my focus would be to give you a broad idea about what were the factors which were responsible for why the Europeans or why the Portuguese came to India. The first factor which we have to understand is the political factor. So if we see the political factor, the one factor which was very, very important is that we see the rise of an empire which is known as Ottoman Empire. This Ottoman Empire was built by the Turks, and they captured a place known as Constantinople. Today, all of you are aware about Istanbul, right? So Istanbul's previous name used to be Constantinople. So they captured Constantinople in 1453. And as a result of this, the trade connection between India and Europe was now getting affected. Why? Because the Turks started putting lots of tariffs. Right? All of us are aware about the tariffs which are being put by Donald Trump. Right? So just like that, in history also, tariffs were put forward by these Turks because they wanted the maximum percentage of commission between this trade. Right? So this created a big challenge for the Europeans. Now they wanted that we don't want to be dependent upon the land route. We need the sea route, direct connection between Europe and India. This is one of the most important event, most important political factor which was responsible for the coming of Europeans to India. Number two, Along with this, there were certain other minor political factors also, which we need to remember. So this is the first one, the capture of Constantinople. When we take classes, we also give you these PPTs. Why are PPTs important? So that you can go through them, you can revise them. In the class, I will also do dictation, right? Dictation is important so that you can have short notes. And short notes are always going to help you in building up a good framework, and you can do better answer writing with these short notes. In this lecture, I'm not focusing on because this is more of a demo lecture and I'm recording it for all of you so that you can understand. But in the class, I will give you a dictation also, because many of the students who are just in the beginning phase of learning, they are addicted to writing, they are addicted to making notes. Once you will get matured, you will learn it's better to just have focus on the conceptual understanding and then do the answer writing instead. But to understand that this is the time, right? So this is what is going to be required. So capture of Constantinople was not the most important part. Why the Europeans wanted to come to India. Along with this, there were certain rulers also. Like if you see the specific example of Portugal, there was a ruler known as Prince Henry, right? So he wanted to come to India. He wanted to come to India, and that's why, since he wanted to come to India, it became very, very important for him to allocate resources for that. And that's why he started supporting all those travelers, all the adventurers who could find a specific pathway to India. So Prince Henry played a very important role. In fact, he was having a very famous title, the Navigator. Right? The navigator who wanted to travel the world, who wanted to know about the world. So he was a very prominent personality with respect to this. So if somebody asks you two prominent factors, two prominent political factors why Europeans came to India, first will be the capture of Constantinople by the Turks, and number two, Prince Henry. He was very, very interested in going towards the east, and that's why, even though he died in 1460, but his dream was realized by Vasco da Gama in 1498. So please remember these two political factors. Now about social factors. In social factors, we have to just write about Renaissance. The society was getting transformed. It wanted to have maximum knowledge about the subjects also, maximum knowledge about the world also. So this phenomena of Renaissance was very much responsible for the arrival of Europeans. So in society, we are going to write about Renaissance, which is a very prominent factor, because this is something which was defining in nature, Renaissance. And as we have already discussed, Renaissance means rebirth, rebirth of the culture. And since it was the rebirth of the culture, it was going to have a significant impact on all the people of Europe, specifically towards the western part of Europe. Then Economic factor is also important. Why? Because why would someone come from Europe to India? Because there is a demand. So if someone asks you, how does economic factors played a very important role? Because there was a demand for Indian goods. There was a demand for Indian goods. And since there was a demand for Indian goods, naturally, whoever is going to participate in this venture is bound to get profit. That's why Indian spices, textiles, all this were in great demand. We were in fact powerhouse of the world. Many of you would have heard, right? We were Sone ki chidiya, okay, golden sparrow. And more importantly, we attributed a lot of this to our indigenous culture, and our products were in demand everywhere. We contributed around 20 to 25% to the world GDP. That's very high, 20 to 25% to world GDP. Today it is hardly 2 to 3%. In those times it was around 20 to 25%. So that's why those times Indians were having very big economic prowess, and people were having lots of demands for Indian goods. So as a result of this, when Vasco da Gama came to India, he had 60 times profit. Plus, as I've told you, the Turks started putting taxes. They started putting taxes on the products. So that's why the price was increasing for the people of Europe. While on the other hand, Indians were also not benefiting that much out of because the Turks were getting the maximum commission. That's why the Europeans thought, let us go to India. That's why the most important economic factor, it was the demand for Indian goods. And India was a powerhouse, industrial powerhouse, not in the modern sense, but in the traditional sense. Next, if somebody asks you what was the prominent religious factor, right? So if it was the prominent religious factor, it is that the Portuguese, they were Catholics, right? Among the Catholics, Pope is considered as the highest representative of the God on earth. So the Catholics, the Pope had given a bull to Prince Henry that please spread the message of Christianity far and wide. And since he was doing that, religion played a very important role. It provided the thrust since the Europeans wanted to spread their religion far and wide. And all these civilizations which were there towards the east, including India, some of them they got influenced by them in the later stages. But yes, religion played a very important role, and the blessings of the Pope played a prominent role why these monarchies were also supporting these adventurers. They wanted to promote Christianity, that's why they wanted to come to India. Technological is equally important. Why it is equally important? Because for coming from Europe to India, you need to have technology. And for that, the Europeans were building the best of the ships in those times. In fact, if we talk about Portuguese were building double-decker ships. So when you have large ships, they are good for commerce. You can have a big crew. You can go to far off places. That's why technology was very, very important. Along with ships, you also need compass, right? Because if you want to go in any direction, you have to have a compass for surety. In which direction you are heading, north, east, west, or south. So compass was developed by the Europeans so that they can roam around the world. Today, all of our lives is directly linked with GPS. If GPS stops for a day, it's difficult for majority of us to reach the right spaces. And those times they were using compass. And most importantly, cartography. These travelers kept on making maps so that in the future other travelers could also reach the places that they have already visited. So science and tech, okay, science and tech was now becoming prominent in Europe. In fact, in 16th and 17th century, Europe will see what is known as scientific revolution. This scientific revolution was largely trying to tell us about the world without using the ideas of the Pope, without using the ideas given in the Bible. So on the basis of rationality, how the world was functioning was being discussed during this scientific revolution. Like if all of you know about Newton, all of you know about Kepler. So they came out with their laws which were explaining how the world was functioning. So slowly this scientific knowledge was being harnessed to create technology. So Europe was now becoming more rational than before in terms of the application of ideas. That's why I say why the word modern is often linked with Europe first, and then from there we see the entry of the modern ideas. Because Europe went through the process of Renaissance, then they went through the process of scientific revolution, and finally in the 18th century we are able to understand that Europe went through a process which is known as Enlightenment. During Enlightenment, we saw best of the ideas emerging in every field. Like in polity, all of you know about probably Montesquieu, right, who gave the concept of separation of power. We also see the idea of equality from Rousseau. We also see the idea of freedom of speech and expression from Voltaire. So all such people, in fact John Locke, he is known as the father of liberalism. All such ideas which will become the focal point of all the revolutions in the world. All the revolution, including American Revolution, French Revolution, unification of Germany, Italy, all these revolutions which happened in Europe were based upon the ideas of Enlightenment. And why did Enlightenment came into the being? Because the Europe was now becoming scientific. So scientific revolution or rationality was responsible for the rise of the ideas which we cherish today. All of us know about French Revolution's main ideas or ideals: equality, liberty, and fraternity. All such ideas emerged during the age of enlightenment. Now, let us go back, okay, and try to understand the topic. So, broadly, why Europeans came to India? We will divide factors into political, economic, social, religious, and the technological, right? The political factor, most important, which we have discussed, is the capture of Constantinople. Religious objectives are also there, but because they were trying to increase their influence, right, over the other areas. Plus, they wanted to also reduce the influence of Islam. So this was the one of the objective, because Islam was rising, okay, at this point of time. So that's why they were trying, because in fact the Ottoman Empire was a Islamic empire, and the leader of this Ottoman Empire came to be known as Caliph, or in general we use the word Khalifa. So that's why they wanted to counter the rise of Islam. That's why also the European wanted to spread the message of Christianity. Commercial objectives, as I told you, spices plays a very important role, right? Spices were in great demand, so that's an important economic factor. Next, need of spices. Why there was need of spices? Need of spices was because of twofold things. Number one, spices can be used for preservation, right? In preservatives also we use spices. Number two, they were required because these Europeans eat too much meat, and the digestion of meat is dependent upon the spices. So in every house there was need of spice in Europe, and India was like one of the best area from where you can get the spices. That's why these were the economic factors. Renaissance, we have already discussed about this. And last, Pope's interest in India. Pope has given a bull to Prince Henry that you should go and spread the idea of Christianity. So all these factors combined, and that's why Europeans came to India. Story is on one side, answer writing is on the other side, and framework is very, very important whenever you study. Okay, if you have started following our channel for the purpose of civil services preparation, please remember, whenever you study, study in a framework. We are here to clear the examination. We are not here just for the sake of studying, right? We have objective. After becoming a graduate, you participate in the civil services. So it means the objective is to get the best of the job in this world. So, and for getting that, your idea should be very clear. What I want to achieve. So in these classes, it will not be just about teaching. It's about giving you the right kind of methodology, the confidence, the insight, because I have cleared this exam twice, in 2016 and 2018. I'm a topper of history, and at the same time I cleared all 6 prelims. So the kind of knowledge that I have, right, I often feel like that I have seen this exam for last 10 years very closely. First for myself, right, when I was giving the examination, and then later on when I was helping all the students since 2017. So it's been a long time. It's been a long time since I've been associated with this examination, and I can help you out, right? So if you want to be part of this Pinnacle batch, it will be a very good idea. But before becoming part of any batch, you have to ask yourself, am I going to be sincere enough? Am I going to follow the ideas which will be given in the class? That is very, very important, because without application from your side, result will not come. We are here to give you the right kind of pedagogy for the civil services. We are here to give you clarity, confidence, but execution depends upon you. In fact, 95% of your success chances, or even more than that, it depends upon you. Here, our journey is more about giving you the right kind of guidelines so that your energy can be channelized. That's the most important thing. Now, let us come back to our topic. So I hope the first part is clear to all of you, right? So please remember that Europeans came to India because of multiple factors. It was not just any one or two things which were responsible for that, right? The first person to come, right, that is Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama came to India, and he was the person who will start this trail. After him, large number of people are going to come. Whenever we study, okay, for this examination, you have to have a little bit of idea. You have to have a little bit of idea that in general you may be asked question in prelims about some mapping part also. So always see these maps, okay, always see these maps. They're going to help you out in this process. Next, if we see the profile of Vasco da Gama, because this is for prelims, for mains, this kind of questions can come. Factor responsible for the arrival of Europeans, right? But for prelims, such kind of facts are also important. Like he came to the port of Calicut, 1498. He was received by Zamorin. The Zamorin was the title which was there of the local rulers, who was the Hindu ruler of Calicut. He made 60 times profit. Vasco da Gama made 60 times profit. So he was not satisfied, come profit hai. Next time he came again in 1502, he again came back, right? So he was the person who came to India multiple times, and he played a very important role in the establishment of Portuguese rule in India. When Portuguese came, initially they came as travelers, but over a period of time, they started establishing their system. Like the Portuguese from 1498 to 1505, it was very informal in nature. Many travelers came, like Vasco da Gama. Then Pedro also came. But starting from 1505, they started appointing their governors. Okay, they started appointing their governors so that they could have more influence, so that they can have a better administration. They could institutionalize the process, because if it is dependent only on one person, it's not going to be systematic in nature. 1505 onward, they started appointing their governors. One more fact which you can remember, that Portuguese were the first one to come and the last one to go. In fact, we had to use police in order to get the areas like Goa, Daman and Diu. So please remember that. So I hope the basic idea is clear, right? The Portuguese were the first one to come, and then with the period of time, eventually we see the beginning of other forms of contribution. The second person to come was Pedro Alvarez Cabral. Pedro Alvarez Cabral is very, very important. Why is he important? He is important because he was the one who was able to create this gunboat diplomacy. So far, okay, in general, the trade and commerce between India and the rest of the world, it used to be like on normal basis. It not used to be on the military basis, right? But now they started using guns. They were in minority, so they thought, if we want to contribute to the monopoly of the Portuguese, we should change the system. So they started coming up large number of weapons which were more or less stored in their ships, and through that they started capturing the more and more trade. So this was a fundamental change which happened in the trade of Indian Ocean with the arrival of the Portuguese, and more importantly, in our case, Pedro Alvarez Cabral. Pedro, before coming to India, he was also responsible for discovery of Brazil. In fact, I think many of you would know about it, that Brazil is still linked to Portuguese, right? The language that they speak, it is Portuguese on itself. So Brazil was discovered by him, and he was also attacked by the Arab merchants, because in India trade initially was under the control of Arab merchants, and once the Europeans started coming in, naturally their business was now going to be affected, and once your business gets affected, you take n number of methods which may not be human, and in this case the Arabs attacked them, but Cabral took the revenge, and he came out with the counter attack, and he was able to defeat them. Later on, he was able to establish multiple things in India, right? And gunboat diplomacy is one of the most important contributions that we have. Next, if we see, starting from 1505, we see a systematic rule, and the first governor to be appointed, it is Francisco de Almeida, and he was the one who came out with some new things. Like, first of all, remember this, that he was the first Portuguese governor, right? As we have discussed in our notes also, that the Portuguese from 1498 to 1505, it was more of like informal. Many travelers came, but as such no system was there. 1505 onwards, the government of Portuguese became very serious, that now since we have got the direct connection, we should utilize it to get the maximum profit. And when will you have the maximum profit? When you have a good level of administrators who can rule, who can regulate the trade, and eventually there was a possibility of gaining territory also. They want to push for the creation of multiple settlements. So Francisco de Almeida was a very prominent personality, and he was the one who was responsible for having this idea that we should capture all the entry and the exit points of Indian Ocean. If you see the Indian Ocean, towards the east, we have the Malacca Strait, right? And towards the west, we have the Strait of Hormuz and the area of Eden. So if you can capture this, effectively you can rule the Indian Ocean. So that became their objective, that we will capture them. Then he also fought this battle, okay, in which he had to fight with the navies of Egyptian army as well as that of the Gujaratis. So as a result of this, okay, he lost his son also, but later on he took the revenge and defeated both of them. This is famously known as the Battle of Diu. So in the Battle of Diu, he is able to defeat them, and then he started something which is known as Blue Water Policy. Blue Water Policy means that your navy should be strong enough to fight a war even in the middle of the ocean. It should not be just around the territory, okay, which is known as the territorial waters. It should be about the higher seas. That's why he wanted to create such a navy which can fight in the higher seas, which is, in another word, also known as Blue Water Policy. So Francisco de Almeida was a very important personality, the first governor who gave them the vision to capture the trade of whole Indian Ocean. He also won in the Battle of Diu. He was also trying to create a navy which could now work in different parts of the oceans. That's why he played a very important role. Next, if we see Alfonso de Albuquerque, okay, so he was the one who came just after the Almeida. He was considered, okay, or he is often even now considered the real founder of the Portuguese rule. What's the meaning of a real founder? Real founder means somebody who is able to institutionalize the whole process, okay. He is known as the real founder because he was able to create political institutions in India. He was able to do social reforms. He also invested his time in economic development of the areas which he captured, and he was also the person who participated in the development of art and architecture. So if you see the policy of Alfonso de Albuquerque, then he was a complete person, a complete personality. So that's why he is often considered as the real founder. So please remember this concept of real founder. The concept of real founder is applicable not only to him. In every empire, we have a real founder. Like in the Mughal Empire, the real founder is often associated with the Akbar. The real founder, really, everywhere there is going to be a real founder. So real founder is someone who is having the best of the personalities and who is able to institutionalize the process, who is able to create that kind of a energy that the whole empire can run on that basis. So for him, first of all, he was also a good imperialist. He was able to capture Goa. That's a very, very important victory. He captured Goa from Yusuf Adil Khan, and he was the ruler of Bijapur in 1510. This question, very straightforward fact, was asked in prelims. That's why when we prepare, okay, when we prepare for UPSC, we have to clearly, distinctly understand that what is important for prelims and what is important for mains. This topic, okay, which we are discussing, the arrival of the Europeans, is very important for prelims. And in mains, largely they ask relatively less questions, but for the sake of developing answer writing in our classes, we'll start from these topics also. We will focus only on the main theme for the mains, but for the prelims, you have to remember such kind of facts, okay. And he took the help of Vijayanagar Empire also. At the time when Portuguese came to India, we had Bahmanis and we had Vijayanagar, and both of them, they had trading relationship with the Bahmanis, and from the Bahmani they captured Goa. Then he also seized and made stronghold at Malabar and at Hormuz in the Red Sea. He was able to capture these areas so that he can capture the trade. Very, very important. Next, and by commanding all the exits to the sea routes, he ensured Portugal's strategic control over the Indian Ocean. So he was able to strategically control over the Indian Ocean by entry. Even though the vision was given by Francisco de Almeida, it was nearly achieved by Alfonso de Albuquerque. That's why please remember he is often known as the real founder. His contribution, okay, his contribution is not just limited to this. His contribution can be seen in other areas also. Like please see on the board, he abolished sati in 1515 in the area that he governed. One of the earliest person to abolish sati in India. Sati will be abolished by Akbar also. later on. So we have to remember these facts. Why are we trying to understand the multiple topics at the same time? So that you can have a guided kind of a study, so that you can understand that if we can assimilate different parts of the knowledge, any difficult question asked by UPSC in prelims, we can easily understand, right? That's very, very important. Second, he encouraged Portuguese coming to India to have local wives, so that there could be a good connection between the natives and the Portuguese. That's number two. Number three, he introduced new plants also. All of you know that they came from the region of the Americas, and from America many new plants were introduced, like tobacco, potato, tomato, and even cashew nuts. All of you, if you have visited Goa, you would have found that cashew nuts is something very prominent there, right? So multiple things were now introduced by them in India, and that became prominent over a period of time. Then he undertook the work of constructing roads as well as irrigation, so economic development in this region. And most importantly, during this tenure, Portuguese settled in Goa and Cochin, and many artisans, they started building up the architecture. If you have seen the photos of the church which are there in Goa, many of them were constructed during these times. So this is how the relationship of India with the Portuguese started developing in a remarkable manner. These governors played a very important role in establishing their control, and over a period of time, it also has created a Portuguese heritage. Next, if we see, the next person in the line is Nino de Cunha, right? So Nino de Cunha was the person who first of all shifted the headquarters from Cochin to Goa. That's his first contribution. Second contribution, he was also able to secure the region of Basin from Bahadur Shah of Gujarat. Then he treacherously killed Bahadur Shah. He called him that let's have a party, let's sit in the boat, and then he was treacherously killed in 1537. And he was also the person during whose time the Portuguese went towards Bengal, so they were able to create a settlement at Hooghly. But these are some of the basic points which are often going to come in the prelims, right? So we should be aware about this. Next, if we see the policies of the Portuguese. So in general, there were three major policies which were pursued by the Portuguese in India in order to create a near monopoly in trade and commerce. Let us just try to understand these three policies. Okay. So if we talk about policies, the first one is known as Carta system. Few of the words in the beginning you will find that the pronunciation, the meaning is difficult to understand, right? Because all of us understand our regional languages, but very few of us are having knowledge of Portugal. English in general, most of us have learned because of the colonization and the requirement in global times. Carta system, it is nothing but it was a permit. Okay, it was a permit which was given by the Portuguese authority, and everyone was required to have this permit. If you will not take the permit for trade and commerce, then the ship can be confiscated and all the goods could be considered as contraband. It could be whatever the Portuguese think about the person, they could do anything about that, right? So if they could be treated like slave, they could be killed, they could be shot, anything can happen. The Carta system was a kind of a permit system which was to be taken by all the ships so that they can effectively control the trade. Second system which was introduced by them is known as Kafila system. So the problem was everybody was not ready to accept these systems of the Portuguese. So those merchants who were ready to accept, they required security. Why would anybody accept your system if you cannot provide security? So they said, we will provide you security. So what used to be, like suppose there used to be merchant ships in the middle and at the back, and then at the front there used to be navy of Portuguese, and in between there used to be ships of merchants. They used to go out in a kafila. There were two benefits of this. For the merchants, it provided safety from the pirates, like Captain Jack Sparrow, right? And if you see from the side of the Portuguese, they were going to get revenue. So this ensured revenue for the Portuguese. This ensured protection for the merchants. Right? So the second system is known as Kafila system. And number three, it is known as the blue water policy, which we have already discussed. It means the creation It means the creation of a navy which can fight in the higher seas. So these are largely the three systems which Portuguese created in India: Carta system, Kafila system, and Blue Water policy. Carta system can come in the examination. So please remember, it was a kind of permit system. In fact, what they did, some of the products, they didn't allow them to be traded at all. Right? Like some of the spices, they said this is going to be a royal monopoly. Only we can trade. While the others, you can trade in them, but you have to get a permit for that purpose. So this is how the Portuguese tried to get the maximum out of their relationship, which was now developing with India. And this is known as the Cartas system. All right. So please remember about this. All right. This is a very important one. And if you're going to carry a ship without Cartas, it could be shot down. If we see that to what extent the Portuguese were successful, to what extent they were successful in their policy. So they were not successful 100%. There are few limitations. And why did these limitations come into the picture? So please try to understand, there was opposition from traders. The traders like Arabs, traders of indigenous India, they were not happy with these policies of the Portuguese. In fact, they kept on pleading with the Indian rulers to check these kinds of steps which were being taken by Portuguese. Right? So that's why there was a little bit of problem in the roads for the Portuguese. Second, Indian coastline was such a long, right? We have a very long coastline. It was not easy for the Portuguese to have the resources to police the whole of this coastline. So that's why naturally, because of a very big region, they were not able to handle this. Number three, Portuguese officials were also corrupt. Many of them were ably assisting the other traders that we can help you out, you could just give us some money. So because of corruption, Carta system etc. could not be applied 100%. They could not capture the area of Aden. Okay, and finally, because of this, they were not able to create a strong monopoly in India during the 16th century. And by the 17th century, as we have just discussed, we see the entry of two major powers initially in the first half, that is the Dutch and the English, and they will be responsible for breaking the monopoly. Whichever level of monopoly they were able to create, that was broken down by both of them. That's why by 17th century, the whole empire which the Portuguese were trying to create in the field of commerce was now being challenged very successfully. So UPSC can ask you this question, okay, Kafila I have already discussed. What are the factors responsible for the decline of Portuguese in India? Why did they decline? They were the first one to come, 1498. For 100 years, they were largely on their own. They could have done anything, but why did they decline by the 17th century? So again, as I've told you at the beginning of the class, that whenever you read these kinds of topics, have a system with you: political, economic, social, culture, religious factors. Because just for the rise, just for the arrival, everywhere, we can have multiple factors. So the first major factor which was responsible is that Portuguese, since they were trying to capture maximum trade and commerce in this region, the other person, those who were pirates etc., they were against them, right? So many of the pirates kept attacking the ships of the Portuguese. So they were always afraid because of this. They could not keep a control over that. Plus many of the merchants, okay, like the Arabs and even Indian rulers also kept on fighting against the Portuguese, like Bahadur Shah in the region of Gujarat. Many of them kept on fighting, right? So that's why they could not have that control. So the Portuguese enterprise could not have that 100% ratio to control this region. Second, there were certain political factors also which were responsible for the decline of Portuguese, okay, since they were part of the Europe, the country which is immediately next to Portuguese, that is Spain. So in 1580, what happened? The king of Spain, whose name was Philip II, he defeated Portugal. He defeated Portugal and annexed it. So try to think. Portuguese were controlling some parts in India, and they themselves are being controlled by the Spain in 1580. So that's why their reputation was now lost. Okay, and after that, eventually there was a Portuguese succession crisis. Next, they participated in Anglo-Spanish War of 1585 to 1604, which completely broke them down. So it was the local crisis that they were having in their own country in Europe, which was responsible for the downfall of their power in India. That's one thing which you have to remember, right? That's one thing which you have to remember. Next, the religious policy also. If we see the religious policy, the Portuguese were Catholics. Since they were Catholics, they were trying to convert people in India. Because in general, Catholic, they want to spread the message of Christ far and wide. And this was not liked by the Hindus and the Muslims because they wanted to have their own culture. So because of this factor also, they were not able to control the community for a long time. Had they had a good relationship with Indian community, probably the Portuguese could have remained with us for a very long time. But it always created that problem. Plus, the the concentration of Portuguese was not just in India. They were also concentrating in other areas like Brazil. So after 1530s, their focus was now shifting towards Brazil. And that's why from India also, there largely it was more of just like a trade and commerce rather than creation of an empire. So that's why divided attention was also responsible for the decline. Proliferation of sea routes and technology. Initially, Portuguese were having the finest ships. They were having control over the cartography or the maps. But by 16th and later 17th century early, everyone was having this information. So no more monopoly over science and technology. And others like Dutch came and defeated the Portuguese. Then the English came. They also defeated the Portuguese. So as a result of this, by the early 17th century, they were completely becoming a minor power in India. And the next round of struggle was now going to be between the Dutch versus English versus French, and finally the struggle will be between English and French, the Carnatic Wars, and then the English will be responsible for the creating empire in India. Please remember, these connections are very important. These connections help you in creating a very good understanding also. All right, so please focus on creation of connections. Alright, so we have discussed the factor responsible for the decline of Portuguese. Now let us move forward, right? If we move forward, in general, UPSC can ask you this thing also in your mains, right? And what is the significance of Portuguese in India? So when we talk about significance, I hope by now everybody is aware that we should write the significance in political, social, economic, religious and art and architecture. What is the political significance which we can think about at this point of time? The first thing, the focus was now shifting from army to naval power. Very, very important. And this idea is going to be learned by all the Europeans. And the whole colonization of the world, which began from this 15th century, was based upon naval power. Number two, we also see the signing of commercial treaties with Indian rulers for the first time. So this is the political significance of the arrival of Portuguese. If we think about social sphere, then some missionary activities came along with them, and many people of India, they got converted. So Christianity started spreading in India and it becoming part of Indian society. Portuguese also gave patronage to painters, artists, sculptors, right? And as a result of this, we see new kind of art and architecture. Economically, as all of us know, that the crops that they introduced, it was going to have a big impact on India's agriculture in the long run. All of us know that today, that many of the things that we consume, they were not originally from India itself. Introduction of potato, tomato, all of this, it was done by the Portuguese. In fact, tobacco remains a very important crop with respect to economic activities in India, and this is the outcome of the Portuguese. More importantly, they were also responsible for the plantation agriculture in India. Next, if we talk about technology, so they started creating troops on the basis of this drilling group of infantries, just like that of the Spanish model. So modernization of army was now also going to happen in India in the future, and the Portuguese started the process, which was continued by the other European powers. Some of the Indian powers also learned from them. They created double-decker ships, as we were just discussing at the beginning of the class. They created double-decker ships. So in these double-decker ships, they could easily come up with large number of people, and this created the right kind of competition even in the future, right? The same thing happened. Next, architecture, as we have discussed, the word used for them is the Iberian, right? So they were able to come out with lots of architecture, most prominently the churches which were created in India. And they also integrated with us with the world economy. They integrated our trade with Japan, with Southeast Asia, with Europe, multiple parts. So Indian trade and commerce in fact increased in 16th and 17th century. Please try to remember, India was not colonized in 16th and 17th century. So for the initial 200 years, we benefited out of this European linkage. In the 18th century, when our empire started declining, they took the power and eventually we were subordinated for 200 years. And in 1947, we were able to become independent. I'll keep on linking these things so that the perspective becomes very clear. Even if somebody asks you something in the interview about these things, you'll be able to give a very good answer. So whenever we teach, it's not just about prelims, mains, it's also about creating a personality. It's about creating that knowledge base in which you can utilize on your own whenever you have a frank discussion with anyone. Next, some basic trivia fact which you have to remember, like on the west coast they had settlements at Daman, Salsette, Bombay, east coast at Saint Thomas, Madras and Hooghly. They also were the responsible for introduction of printing press. All of you know that dissemination of knowledge, okay, in the times till the 20th century were largely through the physical medium. So starting from 16th century all the way till 20th century, it was just about the knowledge of printing press which increased the knowledge base across the world, and they were the one to introduce printing press in India. Then by 1631 they lost Hooghly. 1661 the Bombay was given to Charles II of England in dowry. So Bombay was given to the British East India Company by Charles II, who himself had got this as a gift from the Portuguese. 1739 the Marathas has captured Salsette and Basin. So they became a very small power. Small areas remain under their control, and that continued all the way till 1961 when we had to give them many warnings, and finally they accepted and eventually they left India. This is the story of the Portugal, right, which all of us need to remember. The Portugal were the one who were controlling many parts, right, coming from the region of the Calicut, going towards the north, controlling Daman, Diu, Goa. All these areas were under their control, and when the next level of powers came, they got defeated. This is the first part of arrival of Europeans. Now after this part, what you need to remember, the next power which came to India was Dutch, right? Dutch, which the people from the Netherlands, they came to India. When we discuss facts about Dutch, we need to remember one thing. The Dutch, they created the company. Initially, there were a large number of different companies in Dutch, right, starting from the 1590s, but they were consolidated in 1602, and this company came to be known as VOC. Okay, this was known as VOC, and for just basic understanding in English we say Dutch East India Company. So we can always remember the easier one rather than the difficult one. They got the charter. One very important fact is that this was the first multinational corporation. First multinational corporation. Why? Because this was the company which issued stocks. Okay, anybody could become a partner in this, a member in this, a shareholder in this. And this was something unique. That's why this company was going to be the first multinational corporation in the world. It issued stocks. When they came to India, they created their first factory at Masolipatnam. Okay, they got the land from the Golconda rulers, and this is how they created their settlement. If we talk about their other factories, okay, that factory, the main headquarter was at Pulicat, where they created this fort, Jalria. Okay, they also had settlement at Chinsura, Kasim Bazar, even Patna, Balasore, as well as Surat. Why are we trying to remember this kind of information? Where are their factories? Because sometimes UPSC asks these kind of questions in the prelims. And as all of you know, prelims is something which is very unpredictable. Anything under the sun can come there. And the one topic which is very important in modern history with respect to prelims is the arrival of Europeans. In fact, if you just see this class, okay, and then you will solve the previous year questions, majority of the previous year questions from this topic can be easily solved. And when we make these PPTs, when we have discussions in the class, the logic is very clear. The student should be able to get understanding of everything. My work and the work of the other faculty who are part of the Pinnacle Batch is to make sure that you get the right kind of mentorship, you get the right kind of knowledge, you get the right kind of notes so that your work is simplified and you can focus on becoming a civil servant. The process of becoming a civil servant starts with the preparation. By the time you get selected, you already have the traits which are required by UPSC. And later on, when you have the training, you become a complete officer and then you start serving the nation. This is how it goes on. They were the one who dislodged the Portuguese from India's maritime trade, right? And we'll discuss the factors. What are the factors responsible for the success of Dutch in India? Abhi iske baad we're going to discuss that only, right? First, some facts. They were the exporter of Indian textiles. They had also conquered Java. In fact, please remember, the largest area which will be under the control of the Dutch, that will be in the Indonesia. In fact, India got independent in 1947 and Indonesia by 1949, right? And they got independence from the Dutch. So for Dutch, Indonesia is going to remain a very, very important region. Then later on, they are going to lose to British in 1759. This is known as the Battle of Chinsura or Battle of Vedra, in which they lost. And after that, their power was not that much prominent and they declined. Right, so this is the brief chronology starting from 1602 all the way up to 1759. So please remember, right? Whenever we study, first we should have some facts and then we go for the understanding. With respect to mains, the one area which UPSC can explore is the factor responsible for their success. But before discussing that, let us just see 2-3 more points. Like number one, if we see the chief administrative center of this Dutch East India Company, this was at a place which is known as Batavia, today's Jakarta. So from there they used to control their trade across the Indian Ocean. Second, this was headed by a governor general, and this governor general also used to have a council. In fact, there used to be 17 directors in this company, and they used to call themselves Gentlemen 17, right? So that's a very significant kind of a name that they've chosen for themselves, Gentlemen 17. And these directors used to control this organization. So why did they became stronger than the Portuguese? What were the factors which were working in their favor? Let us try to understand them. First is very obvious, business organization. This Dutch East India Company, it was a limited liability company, right? This was a company based upon the shareholder model. So it was having access to finance, it was professionally run, it was not a fiefdom of anyone. That's why all these qualities helped them. They could focus on trade and commerce in a remarkable manner. They could get the best of the margins, which could increase their profits. That's why this company was very, very strong. Second, this is equally important. The Portuguese came to India because they had created best of the ships. But by 17th century, Dutch created the best of the ships, and their ships were known as fluid ship. Fluid means the ships which were relatively smaller in their design, right? And they could be easily taken care of by a smaller crew. So they were faster also, and they could work with the smaller crew. So because of all these, the operating cost of these ships was less. So that's why new technology of ships also played a very important role in the rise of Dutch power in Indian Ocean and more importantly in India. Next, if we see religious policy, right? Dutch were not Catholic, okay? Dutch were Protestants. Let me give you a brief idea about this, okay? What's the difference between both of them? Because many of you are new students and you would not know about it. So there are lots of division in Christianity. One major division is between the Catholics and Protestants. Initially, it was the Catholics who were the prominent one. These Catholics used to believe in the interpretations of Pope. Okay, so Pope is very important in the Catholic religion. Protestants, these were the people who kept on asking questions to the Catholic Church. One of the most famous personality, he was a priest from northern part of Germany by the name of Martin Luther. So Martin Luther asked 95 questions to church in 1517. And these were the kind of questions which were very difficult for the church to answer. That's why Martin Luther said, for us it is not important to follow the guiding of Pope. Okay, so this trend came to be known as Protestants. So Protestants, these became prominent in countries like northern part of Germany, Dutch, even England became a Protestant country where the state was having control over the church. So these people who do not believe in the guidance of Pope, who believed largely in Bible, okay, so they largely believed in Bible more than church, more than whatever is being said by the Pope. So such people, they are known as Protestants, and Protestants are more liberal in nature. They do not impose their ideas on the others in comparison. Right? So this is how it used to be. After Martin Luther, we had John Calvin, and multiple such personalities were there. In fact, in Europe, there were religious wars of Catholics versus Protestant, and one such prominent war is known as 30 Years' War. And after that, Europe became more secularized, and this is after the treaty which was signed in 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia. So Europe was divided among the Protestants and the Catholics, and the Dutch who came to India, they were followers of Protestants. So that's why their religious policy was more liberal in comparison to the Portuguese. So that was also a positive factor. By this, they could accommodate with the indigenous communities, and they were not required. They were not required to effectively have any kind of pressurization on anyone. Like they even gave a sanctuary to Jewish families. That shows they also were having resources in other parts of the world which could be utilized for funding their trade. Like from region of Africa, they got gold, and gold could be utilized to purchase spices, to purchase other commodities in India, and then they can take it to the rest of the part of the world where they could gain a healthy profit. Next, the focus was on Southeast Asian trade, which gave them a very good monopoly in the region of Southeast. Right. So all these factors played a very important role in the mastery of Dutch in several parts of India. They were able to defeat the Portuguese also, and that's why they became popular. Next, if we see, with the period of time, the Dutch were not able to sustain this monopoly, and there were multiple factors responsible for that. And what were those? Like number one, whatever methods they were applying in the trade and commerce, they stopped working after a period of time. Like, please see, number one, it was change in profitability which affected them, right? Like if you see, the share of textile and raw silk increased from 16% to the total import to Europe at the beginning of 17th century to 55% at the end of the century. They were focusing on pepper and trade, the spice trade. But this spice trade demand relatively more or less reached a plateau after a period of time, but the demand of textile kept on rising. English focused more on textile, they focused more on the pepper and spice trade. That's why their profitability start declining after a period of time. Second, they were defeated by a local Raja known as the Raja of Travancore, Martand Varma. So Martand Varma was able to defeat them in the Battle of Kolachal in 1741. And this was also a big blow to the Dutch. Plus, they also had a rivalry with the British, and that rivalry was somehow taken to a conclusion by delineating the area. The English was now going to focus more on India. The Dutch were now going to focus more on the East Indies or the Indonesia. So that's what we need to remember. Alright, so all these factors were responsible for the decline of Dutch, and finally they were defeated by the British in 1759. After that, they were not able to have a major impact in India. By the middle of the 18th century, largely we were having only two powers, right? One was the British, the second was the French, and who were busy in fighting the three Carnatic wars. So this is all about the Dutch, which is relevant for us. Third one that we have is, even though it is British, but first we will cover the Danes so that later on we can focus on the two remaining ones, all right, the British and the French. All right, so chronological order में वो पहले आएगा, but याद रखिएगा. Danes. So when we talk about Danes, at that time, the area of Danish, they were also having control over Norway. Their major focus was only on the activities of the religion. Two major areas were under their control. What was Serampur, okay, and the second was Trankebar, and they used to focus on religious activities. One area which was very strategic, which was under their control, all of you should remember, it was Nicobar Island. Initially, Nicobar Island was under their control. Later on, it was sold by them to the British around 1845. This company was very weak. It was underfunded. Okay, even the population of the Danish was not in support of this company. Many of them, they kept on asking for its and eventually this company was abolished by one of their king. Again it was revived, but it could not create any major impact. So basic detail, number one, in 1616 this was created. 1620 in the first settlement in the Trankebar region in Tamil Nadu. Number three, it established settlement in Serampur in Bengal in 1676. Okay, so that's the number three. And they failed to strengthen themselves, and by 1845 they sold all the settlement to the British. If you remember, even this much is good enough for prelims. Why? Always when we study, the study should be as per the requirement of prelims and mains. Wherever we feel like it's not worth it, we should reduce the amount of time given to that topic. And that's strategic, right? Please remember that. Next, if we see, okay, the foundation was in 1616. Principal settlements we have already discussed, the two settlements, and then they were gone. Impact. So if we see with respect to religion, the Danish, they were also Protestant. Okay, and in fact they were one of the followers of Martin Luther, and one of the person who is very important, remember, is Bartholomeus Ziegenbalg. So he was the one who was very influential, and in fact he was the person who translated the New Testament, okay, in Tamil in 1715. So one of the first language in which New Testament was translated, it was Tamil, and that's why you can see the influence of Christianity a little more in the region of Tamil Nadu. So please remember that, and that is the impact of this Danish company. And Danish company eventually lost. Why? Because they caught up in the Napoleon Wars which were being fought between the Britain and France, and eventually they got defeated, and finally their area was taken control by the British. Next, the most important topic for all of us, that is the British. In general, the majority of the modern India is India versus Britain, India versus Britain. So in the initial classes, I often give less focus to British because it's more about understanding the other companies, right? So let us now see the basic detail. This company was founded in 1599 as English Association of the Merchant Adventurers. 1608, okay, they were able to open their first factory at Surat, and they got the charter from the Queen in 1600, came to India, and then they eventually opened their first factory at Surat. By 1619, okay, like initial 10-12 years, they were able to open factory at Agra, Ahmedabad and Bharuch. Once UPSC asked this question, which of the following areas were settled by the British by the first quarter of 17th century? So the answer in that was Bharuch. So these are the kind of facts which can come. Okay, so that's the first area which their focus was in and around the area of Gujarat. Slowly they got into the other areas. Like if you see in south, first they went towards Masaulipatnam in 1611, and later on they got the lease of Madras, very important. In 1639, from a local Raja who used to be previously serving the Vijayanagar Empire, they got the lease. The first major province, Madras, was now ready by 1639, and they created Fort St. George at this place. Later on, okay, as we were discussing, the Portuguese gave them the island of Bombay. It was given to their king, Charles II, and Charles II gave it to East India Company for an annual rental of hardly 10 pounds. So in 10 pound, they got Bombay for a year. Right? That was the rental they were paying. In the east, the company was able to open its factory at Hariharpur, Balasore by 1633. Then in 1690, they opened their factory at what is known as Sutanati in the region of Bengal. Later on, they got the Diwani, okay, of three areas, Sutanati, Kalikata and Govindpur. Can you see the word Kalikata? Okay, so and these three were merged, and this is how Calcutta was created. The first major province where they made their entry was Madras for the future point of view. Second, it was Bombay, and the last one, it was Calcutta or the region of the Bengal. And later on, Bengal will play a very important role in how they are going to use the resources of India for capturing and defeating the rest of the powers. This is about the English East India Company. When they came to India, two major personalities were looking for concession. One of them was Captain Hawkins, and the second one was Sir Thomas Roe. And they played a very important role in getting the concessions for the English, and this is how their standing kept on increasing. In fact, when they were initially bargaining, Portuguese were completely against the British entry in India. And that's why the British and the Portuguese fought also in 1612 and 1614, and the English were able to defeat Portuguese. And Mughals also played this strategic card. They didn't want the Portuguese to be the only power. Why? Because then they will do anything that they would like. But with the competition coming into the picture, this was good news for the Mughals in the 17th century, a very bad news for the 18th century, because after the death of Aurangzeb, no strong ruler could come, and by the middle of the 18th century, the British were ready for the next, and that was the capture of India. They also got concession from Shah Sultan Shuja. Once they were trying to fight against Aurangzeb in around 1680s, and Aurangzeb was able to defeat them, they had to pay a compensation of 1.5 lakh rupees so that their privileges could be restored. So even in the later part of 17th century, English were no match with the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire were very strong and powerful till Aurangzeb remained in power, and that is very, very important to remember. One more point which you should remember: the most historic trade deal or the historic trade farman is the Farman of 1717. This was the farman which was given by Farooq Shiar, and this allowed them to have a trade in maximum parts of India. In fact, the conflict between the British and the rest of the native small powers, it happened because of this Farman of 1717, which was given by Farooq Shiar. But for them, this worked perfectly. Okay, so this is what you need to remember. Okay, next, if we talk about this company was more or less controlled by what is known as the court of directors. Initially, they were known as, they were having lots of committees, 24 directors were there. And why did the English win in India? The English win in India in general, first of all, because of very professional level of administration, right? The court of directors used to create committees, they used to look after the multiple functions. Number two, they were having the strongest navy. And number three, discipline of army was very good. And number four, they used the debt very well. Whenever they needed money for fighting wars, they used to get it from the London market, and they used to repay the interest. That's why their financial instruments that they utilized were very, very crucial in their success. Later on, when they got Bengal, after that they didn't require much debt from outside, because Bengal itself was in a surplus state, and this state was looted and plundered by the British for fighting against the rest of the powers. So this is about the initial introduction of the various companies, right? The last company that we're going to discuss, all right, the last company that we're going to discuss is about the French. Now, French are the one who were the last one to come to India. These French, okay, at that point of time, were under the control of King Louis XIV. King Louis XIV was one of the most strongest leader. Okay, and he belonged to the Bourbon dynasty. The French company which was created, it was created with state support. And the state support was going to be very problematic in the future. All of you know that if the company is under the direct control of the state, it becomes just like in India what we have is as a PSU. So every important decision was going to come directly from Paris. Okay, so that's the nature of the company which you should be aware of, which is going to become a bit problematic for the French later on. Let us try to understand. Okay, the company was formed in 1664. They had a minister by the name of Colbert, and Colbert was a minister under King Louis XIV, and they created French East India Company. Once they came to India, again, just like the British, their first settlement was also in Surat. In 1668, it was opened, and the person who was responsible for this was Francis Caron at Surat. 1669, With the help of the person known as Markara, they opened their factory at Masolipatnam. So within the initial 2 years itself, they were able to establish themselves first at Surat and second at Masolipatnam, just like the British did in their initial times. Then 1673, Francois Martin became their first governor, and he was the one who was responsible for Pondicherry. Remember Pondicherry. Pondicherry is very, very important. Why? This is going to become the main base of French. And in fact, this main base was also strategically not that good. Pondicherry could be captured from any side. And when they created their base here, in fact, they had a fight with the Dutch. The Dutch were able to defeat French during the 17th century, and for 6 to 7 years, they didn't give them back Pondicherry. They got it only by 1699. So they didn't learn from this that Pondicherry was not a very good base. And when they will fight with the British, with Pondicherry as a base, as said by many of the historians, they had zero chance of creating an empire in India. 1688, they established a territory known as Chandranagar, and that was established in Bengal. So these are some of the initial settlements which were created by the French in India. So these are the prominent ones, right? If we talk about their organization was run by the directors. There were 12 directors which were there, okay, but largely it was under the control of the state. Later on, few more directors were added in this company, so they became around 20, okay, by 1688. Next, if we talk about them, around 1720, the financial position became weak for the French. Later on, they tried to enhance themselves, right? They occupied Mauritius. Then they were able to capture the area of Malabar, Karaikal by 1725 and 1739 respectively. And the most important governor general for the French, it was Dupleix. Dupleix came to India and he eventually became the governor in 1742, and this was going to be the major region responsible for the political rivalry between the French and the English in India. Try to understand this. Okay, that once Dupleix came to India, once Dupleix came to India as Governor General, he was a person who wanted to create an empire. In fact, the idea of a political empire in India, first time, it was of Dupleix. It was not of English. English were not that much skilled in that, right? He was the one who thought about it. Opportunities, they came later on. The British, they were also a strong power. In fact, if you see throughout the 18th century in Europe, there was a fight which was going on between Britain and France. These two were the biggest rivals in 18th century. So India was not an exception to that. So in 18th century, they fought multiple wars, right? They fought the 7-year war. They were on a different side in the American War of Independence, in which the French people, the French army men, helped the Americans in getting independent from the British. So lots of rivalry was there between Britain and France. 3 Carnatic wars were fought, first from 1746 to 1748. This is known as the First Carnatic War. Right? Carnatic is the coastal region which is there in Tamil Nadu. Initially, it was known as Cholamandalam. From Cholamandalam, the word transformed into Coromandel, and in general, for this war purpose, we call it the Carnatic region. The first war was fought between them from 1746 to 1748. Second war was fought from 1749 till 1754. Third war was fought from 1758 to 1763. These are known as the 3 Carnatic Wars. First and the third war, okay, just please remember that first and the third war, they were largely linked to European politics. They were largely linked to European rivalry. It was not linked to Indian region as such. The first war, when it happened from 46 to 48, it was largely an extension of Austrian War of Succession, which was going on in Europe. The English attacked the French. The French got help from the Mauritius governor. They were able to defeat the English, in fact, in the first Carnatic War. They captured Madras, all right, during the first Carnatic War. But when the peace treaty was signed, Aix-la-Chapelle, at that point of time, Madras was given back to the British. but the French were able to showcase their superiority in the First Carnatic War. But since it was more of a European case, so it ended in 1748 with the signing of the treaty as after the Austrian War of Succession. The second war is very, very important for us, 1749 to 1754. This war had shown the decay in India. What has happened? One of the important state which has developed after decline of the Mughals, that was the state of Hyderabad. The state of Hyderabad used to be under the control of Nizam al-Mulk Ashraf Jah. Ashraf Jah, he died in 1748. The moment he died, we see a fight between the rivals claiming the throne. It was between Nasir Jang versus Muzaffar Jang. Okay, the fight was between Nasir Jang versus Muzaffar Jang. Which was going on in Hyderabad after the death of Ashraf Jah. Similarly, in Carnatic used to be a dependency of Hyderabad. Okay, it used to be a dependency of Hyderabad, and in Carnatic, the Nawab at this point of time was Anwaruddin, but Anwaruddin was being challenged by Chanda Sahib. This was the rivalry which was being played out in the region of Carnatic. So, when Dupleix realized that the war is going to happen in these areas, so he thought that let us get the maximum out of this. What Dupleix did? Dupleix favored the dark horses, Muzaffar Jang in the case of Hyderabad and Chanda Sahib in the case of Carnatic. They created an alliance. The alliance was that of Chanda Sahib, Muzaffar Jang and Dupleix himself. Both these three, they met Anwaruddin in the battlefield and Anwaruddin was killed. Okay, Anwaruddin was killed. So this created the space for the rise of Chanda Sahib. Chanda Sahib now became the sovereign in the region of Carnatic. The Carnatic War, as we've discussed, was fought from 1749 to 1754. It also has two phases. The first phase in which the French are going to be victorious, the second phase in which the English are going to become active and will take the battle to a draw, where one area will remain under the control of the French, the other under the influence of the English. So please try to remember, in the first phase of struggle, Chanda Sahib, Muzaffar Jang and the Dupleix, they came together and they killed Anwaruddin. So who became paramount in the region of Carnatic? It was Chanda Sahib. Then they were also able to take care of Nasir Jang. So Muzaffar Jang was able to become the Nawab in the region of Hyderabad. And this was a very big victory for Dupleix. Why? Because he was now having political relationship with Carnatic as well as Hyderabad. In fact, in Hyderabad, he sent one of his most prominent soldier, and that was Bassi. So Dupleix by 1751, try to remember, by 1751 was probably the first person who could have think about creating an empire in India. The English were nowhere clear to them. Okay, they were nowhere closer to them, and that's what is going to be a problem for the English. But at this time, when the Dupleix was going towards the top, Robert Clive came out with a different approach. There was a situation in which Chanda Sahib, the capital of Carnatic was Arcot, it was towards the north, but the son of Anwaruddin, whose name was Muhammad Ali, he had fled to Trichinopoly, which was towards the south. Chanda Sahib thought, let us kill Muhammad Ali also, because tomorrow he may come and he may think about fighting. So Trichinopoly was one of the area where Muhammad Ali was hiding. Chanda Sahib went to fight with him. Robert Clive used this opportunity to seize his capital, and this is famously known as the siege of Arcot. For around 53 days, Robert Clive was able to capture Arcot. Chanda Sahib was having rivalry with the Raja of Tanjore also. So Raja of Tanjore killed Chanda Sahib, And then Robert Clive was able to control the area of Carnatic, the area of Arcot. So as a result, during the later part, Carnatic went out of the hand of French, and the people who became strong here were English, and this was the strategy of Robert Clive which worked, in which he rightly perceived that the moment Chanda Sahib will see that his capital is in danger, he will try to run back, and that was used by him in order to defeat Chanda Sahib, and he had an alliance with the Raja of Tanjore. This is how the Second Carnatic War was played out in India. This Second Carnatic War increased the political ambition of both British as well as the French. The French, they signed a peace treaty in 1754. This peace treaty was going to have a very big impact on French. Why? They recalled their governor Dupleix. Dupleix had served from 1742 to 1754. Around 13-14 years he was in India, and he was the person who could have created an empire for the French, but the French recalled him because the expenditure of the war was very high, and since it was a company which was controlled by the state, it was not that much focused towards the commerce. So they were not having their own money. They were not having their own money to fight against the enemy, and that's why they have to always depend upon Paris, and whatever decision was taken by the Paris was to be accepted. And this was the reason why during the initial years, where more flexibility was required in order to create an empire, Robert Clive will become the person responsible for the creation of British Empire. Even before him, Dupleix could have created it, but Dupleix was recalled by the French, and this was a blunder for the Frenchmen. After 1754, the turn of events came in the favor of British. Reason being, after 1754, they were able to capture Bengal, and this was after this battle of Plassey. Okay, so we'll be discussing about Plassey and all the other battles, Buxar, etc. in the later classes, because initially we always discuss about the arrival of the Europeans. All right. So Plassey was one of the battle in which Robert Clive, he used treachery. Okay, the Nawab of Bengal at that point of time was Siraj-ud-Dowla. Siraj-ud-Dowla, he was a very hot-headed person, and he was being contesting against Robert Clive. But Robert Clive, he was able to create an alliance, most importantly with Mir Jafar. So Mir Jafar, he was the military commander. He signed an alliance with Robert Clive. The Nawab, Siraj-ud-Dowla, was having an army of 50,000. Robert Clive was hardly having 3,000-4,000 soldiers. But still, we see the victory of Robert Clive. Why? Because Mir Jafar, he surrendered in the battlefield, and thereafter the son of Mir Jafar killed Siraj-ud-Dowla. Siraj-ud-Dowla was wiped out in 1757. The British were able to get the resources from 1757 onwards. British were now having resources which they could create whatever a big army they would require, and that's why the unlimited resources which they got from Bengal are going to be very, very helpful in fighting against any of the powers, and in this case it's going to be French. In fact, one of the famous historian, he says that the British used the revenue from the region of Bengal as a financial stick. Okay, and with this stick they kept on beating the French until they finally surrendered in 1763, and that is the truth. So what happened after 1757, when the Europe again was on the verge of a war? So in Europe there is a war which is known as, broadly from 656 itself, 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was going on in England, and finally the host in the England, not particularly in the England region, in the region of Europe, England was also participating. So 1756 to 63, the 7-year war was going on in Europe. The same hostilities could be seen even in India. And this is what is known as the Third Carnatic War, 1758 to 1763. In the Third Carnatic War, Dupleix was already gone. So the person who was now in command, his name was Count de Lally. The Count de Lely was not a very good strategist, not even a very good military commander. He tried to attack Madras, but this strategy failed. Then he called Bassi. Now, all of you remember, Bassi was the person who was stationed at Hyderabad. So, Bassi was also recalled by him, but it also didn't work. Then they fought in the battle, which is famously known as the Battle of Vandewash. This was fought in 1760. In this battle, even Bassi was taken as a prisoner. Then, after Vandewash, the English were not going to give any respite to the French. In 1761, they were able to capture Pondicherry. Now, Pondicherry was the base of the French. Okay, so by 1761, their hopes of creating empire in India were now gone. The 7-Year War was concluded in 1763 with the signing of Treaty of Paris. After this Treaty of Paris, effectively, the French ambition of political empire were gone. They were allowed to stay in India, but not as a political power, only as a commercial power, and that too in a restricted manner. By 1763, all the European powers had come to India, and one has now prevailed, and that was the main power, that is the British. After this, let me just give you a brief idea overall. Okay, the British, they were able to win among the Europeans by 1763. Then they started the process of capturing states in India in a meaningful manner. Bengal was completely taken down after the Battle of Buxar in 1764. Then they fought wars with, in fact, along in this Battle of Buxar, it was not just Bengal. Along with Bengal, they were also able to defeat Awadh. Okay, and they signed the Treaty of Allahabad. After Buxar, they fought wars with Mysore, and Mysore was finally defeated in 1799. Tipu Sultan was killed and Mysore came under their control. Simultaneously, the wars were going on with Marathas, and Marathas were finally taken down by 1817, 1818. Marathas were the most strongest of the power who could have replaced the Mughal Empire. But what was happening, since the Marathas were themselves having internal weaknesses, they were fighting among themselves, they could not create an empire, and it was the British who utilized the policy of divide and rule, and they were able to defeat Marathas. After Marathas, the major power which were left behind, that was Punjab. And after death of Raja Ranjit Singh in 1839, they were able to focus on Punjab also, and Punjab was captured by 1849. Okay, Awadh, which was initially itself under the control of the British, but it was not administered by them. Okay, it was not administered by them. So Awadh was captured by 1856 on the pretext of misgovernance. The most prominent personality among these governor generals who was responsible for capturing a lot of territory, that was Lord Dalhousie. He used multiple methods. He used the process of using the warfare. He was also able to utilize the doctrine of lapse, which all of you would have heard in your school time. The doctrine of lapse was responsible for capturing those areas who were not having natural hair, and the most prominent among them was the area of Jhansi. Okay, so all these policies eventually of capturing and creating an empire in India continues from 1757 all the way up to 1856, and this is going to lead to the creation of one of the biggest revolt, which is known as the Revolt of 1857, in which the British learned a lot of lessons, and they realized that they should not capture any more state. And after that, the administration was taken over from the company by the crown, and from 1858 till 1947 it was the British crown who's going to administer us. So this is the demo lecture in which I have given you the brief idea about the arrival of European. We discussed about the Portuguese, we discussed about the Dutch, we discussed about the Danish, we discussed about the English and French in the end, and the rivalry among them, the three Carnatic wars, and after the victory in the three Carnatic wars, how British are going to take it a top notch, and over a period of time they'll be able to capture multiple areas. So we need to understand that modern history is very important. If you learn about modern history, you can understand how did the states in India have been created. You can learn about our constitution, how the constitution has been created, how in different segments, okay, the reforms were done by the British. You can learn about the level in which how the British East India Company was created, and how over a period of time this East India Company became the part of the Indian Army. So all these small things which we know about modern India are going to improve your understanding of the present. Whatever conflicts that we have with the rival powers, okay, with not the rival as such, but at least we have fought wars with them, like the Chinese and the Pakistan, or even the current skirmish that we have in the region of Bangladesh, or even the relationship with the Myanmar. All these external relationships of India have been shaped by British. The British were responsible for creating lots of issues for us, and we still have that colonial legacy in multiple things. Right? The lack of trust which we have between us and the authority in general, that is also because of the British, because British never considered themselves closer to us. They were racist in all their policies, in their conduct, and that created a big challenge for us. All right. So this is the topic which I wanted to discuss, the arrival of the Europeans. I have just connected the story a little more. Okay. I have connected the story a little more so that you can understand in general. Right. So this is the demo lecture which can help you in understanding how the Pinnacle batch is going to begin. We will have a lot more dictation in the classes, because today it was more about giving you an overview. So that's why when we take classes, it's about taking all the important things into the perspective. And as a student, like when I was an aspirant, I used to always knew which things are going to be useful for me, which are not going to be useful for me, right? So I have learned from that process, and after clearing the exam, I have all those ingredients which are required for the success, and I can transfer all of them to you at a very delicate level. So if you become part of this Pinnacle batch, you will learn everything in a systematic manner. All the topics will be covered of all the subjects, number one, number two. The approach will be very simplified and at the same time effective. Effective because we'll focus on prelims as well as mains at the same time. Like in this class also, we discuss about which area is important for prelims and how you should focus on writing answers for the mains. Third, equally important is that we will focus on giving you those ideas which you can implement to improve yourself in the prelims as well as in the mains, so that the process is not just about studying, it's about becoming effective. All right, all the strategic session, etc., everything will be covered in this batch. So if you want to become part of this Pinnacle batch, then you can become one and you can get the connection with me. We take doubts of all the students in the class itself. We teach, and side by side we take the doubts, and that helps in creating the total understanding that you are looking for. All the very best. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the coming videos. Thank you.